Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment Simon Birmingham is currently taking questions from journalists at the National Press Club.
A bilateral agreement with India would be possible and potential for the future.
You are talking with India in regards to China. As you say, to talk about your differences, you actually need to talk. How frustrating is it for you? Because I know that you asked, I think it was more than a month ago, to talk to your counterpart in China. Have you actually spoken yet? And how frustrating is it, I'm presuming that you haven't been able to have that conversation?
You presume correct, Sab. Look, it's frustrating. It's more disappointing in the sense that I think it is lost opportunity, consistent with the answer that I gave earlier. And the best way to resolve and to work through differences is through dialogue. And Australia is ready and willing to have that mature, sensible dialogue that grown-ups have even when you have differences of opinion. And that doesn't mean that we're going, as I said before, to change our values or to compromise on our policies, but it means that we should be able to get back to the basics of looking at the areas that are mutually beneficial to us, where we can agree with one another and get on with discussion and work to enhance and grow the relationship in those positive areas. And I think international education has stood as one of those great examples, not just of Chinese students studying in Australia, but of the work that we've made through New Colombo and through other measures to encourage Australians to better understand China. And that's important about building the longer-term cultural understanding and people-to-people ties across each nation. And we want to see all of those things actually succeed for the long-term good of both countries, because whether we all like it or not, we share the same dynamic region of the world. The geography isn't going to change. We're going to be sharing this region together forever, and we want to make sure that, so far as it can be, it is a positive relationship, not just for the benefit of our two nations, but for all of the nations in this region.
Ben Packham.
Hi, Minister. Ben Packham from The Australian. I'd like to ask a variation on the theme. What is the way forward for the China relationship? I know this is a subject that DFAT spent thousands and thousands of hours thinking about. Former China diplomat Richard Rigby says things won't change while Xi Jinping is still in power. Do you agree with that? And if not, how do we avoid this situation becoming the new normal?
Thanks, Ben. I received the question earlier about comments that are made in the Global Times or through MFA press briefings, and sometimes I see that those comments are urging Australia not to interfere in China's domestic affairs. I don't believe that we do, and in not doing so, I'm not about to pass commentary on China's political leadership. I think the best thing that we can do as a government is to make sure that where possible, and it again goes back to the question of dialogue with one another, where possible we have those direct discussions about our differences sitting across a table from one another or picking up the phone to one another and not necessarily playing it out in full public view. It is for the Chinese government to determine how they run China and China's policies, and we respect that, just as we expect them to respect the sovereignty of Australia and our rights to run Australian policy in our national interest.
Kirsty Needham.
Kirsty Needham from Reuters. Minister, you mentioned that non-tariff barriers are the new frontier of trade agreements. Australia will try and address these as it diversifies its agreements around the world. But China is also upgrading its agreements with partners like New Zealand to cover non-tariff barriers. It covers things like customs delay, digital certification. These are the areas where Australian producers are getting into strife in the current difficulties with China. So has Australia given up on negotiating an upgraded free trade agreement with China?
I don't give up on anything, Kirsty. Look, I hope that we can get to that point. There is a scheduled review and process for looking at CHAFTA in due course. It's not a particularly old trade agreement so far as these things go. The US-Australia FTA was signed back in the Howard government and marks its 15th anniversary this year. There's probably some things we could seek to upgrade there too. CHAFTA, of course, was signed by the Abbott government and is a much newer and more modern agreement in that sense. There are definitely opportunities we would like to pursue in terms of further dialogue, not just to deal with the issues that we've been asked about already today, but absolutely looking at new opportunities for cooperation. And it would be wonderful to get to that point of being able to have that dialogue. Certainly, if you look at Australia's share of trade, as I said in the speech, covered by free trade agreements, we've grown it from around 26% of Australian exports and trade to around 70% over our time in office. Logically, that means as more and more of our trade is covered by FTAs and achieves the elimination or reduction of tariffs and quotas and preferential access that comes with those trade agreements, then the other bugbears become more important to resolve. Now, our Indonesia agreement was an important breakthrough there, and it enters into force on the 5th of July, in that it has some dedicated processes for Australia and Indonesia to work through those non-tariff barriers as part of that agreement. And that's one of the breakthrough agreements that we've had, and we hope that provides a model for either future agreements or renegotiation of existing ones.